So thanks everybody for your contributions yesterday to Flipgrid on solving the various absolute value equations that I posted. Really good work. It was interesting though that I saw some misunderstandings and misconceptions in some cases. So I'm going to focus on two of the equations. This one equation, the absolute value of x minus 7 equals 24, is comparable to the other one that had addition in it. So I'll just focus on one of those two. And likewise, the other equation, absolute value of 2x equals 32, is very similar to the one that incorporated division. So I'll just use this one with multiplication to represent either of those two. So bottom line is, what it seemed to be the consensus, and I'll work backwards here, the consensus for absolute value of 2x equals 32, the consensus seemed to be that x was equal to plus or minus 16. Over on this equation, absolute value of x minus 7 equals 24, it seemed like the general consensus was x equals plus or minus 31. Now, what I'm not sure I noticed in any case, or in very few cases, was any investment of time into checking your solution. So I'll tell you what, that's what I actually want to do real quick. And when we do check our solutions, I want us to be mindful of order of operations because we need to know that absolute value is a form of grouping. And as such, then when I go to substitute in for x, I'm going to have to perform whatever operations are within those absolute value bars before I then move on to finding the absolute value of that outcome. So the point I'm making here is that if I started with and we're going to work backwards again. If I started with this equation, the absolute value of 2, and I'm going to put parentheses in for where I'll put my value of x, equals 32. I'm going to set this up twice, absolute value of 2. I'm going to put parentheses as a placeholder for what I'm going to put in for x, equals 32. I'm going to go back, and if this solution is indeed correct, that x is either positive or negative 16, then when I put 16 in here, and I do 2 times 16 and get 32, for which I now will find the absolute value of that, 32 equals 32. So we're happy with that one solution. So far half of our solution is verified as being correct. Now let's go back and substitute the negative 16 in. So again, keeping or being mindful of the grouping that's going on with absolute value. 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. I did that multiplication within the bars. Now I'm going to find the absolute value of negative 32, which is 32. And once again, we proved that it is equal to 32 that the equation says. So we're very happy with those two solutions. So let's move on to the other equation, because the other equation we also want to check. And this is a step that it's so easy for us to ignore, but we don't want to ignore it. So let's start with absolute value. I know I'm going to have some x value, minus 7 should be equal to 24. Absolute value of some given x value, minus 7, is equal to 24. So let's start with our positive 31 value. Substitute it in. 31 minus 7 should give us 24, for which we're going to find the absolute value of that. And 24 does indeed equal 24. So I'm perfectly happy with 31 as being a solution. Now let's move on to negative 31, because again, we're contending here, or what many of you were contending here, is that x is equal to positive 31, which we verified is okay. But we want to make sure that also negative 31 works. So let's see, negative 31 minus 7, if I think about that, there's some keep change opposite going on, right? So that's really like saying negative 31 plus negative 7. So don't lose sight of that we're finding the absolute value of. If I add those two negatives together, I'm actually going to get negative 38. for which I'm going to find the absolute value. And then that's going to turn into 38, certainly does not equal 24. So there is definitely something going on here that makes no sense to us because we have one correct solution, 31. That one's fine, but our negative 31 is definitely not working out. So if I were to take a closer look back, actually, let me get rid of some of these notes I didn't realize were lingering around. I actually want to focus on how we solve both of these equations. So the way that I saw a lot of you solving this type of equation is you simply divide it by 2, and then you said the absolute value of x equals 16, and then based on what you got out of the video, you just said, oh, well, if some number is 16 away from 0, then x is either positive or negative 16. And it seems to be that's the same logic that you used on the other equation. Absolute value of x minus 7 equals 24. It seems to be that what folks were doing is adding 7, focusing on this idea of isolating the variable, and they got 31, and the same logic applied. Well, if some number is 31 away from 0, it should justify that it is either 31 or negative 31. The issue is that although we've got that process that seems to work here, it doesn't work here. So I want you to think about that a little more carefully and think about how you might have to revise our process for solving absolute value equations, because it seems like the approach we're taking right now on this focus of isolating the variable the way that we've been used to with traditional equations is working sometimes, as we saw with the absolute value of 2x equals 32, but is not working other times when we see the absolute value of x minus 7 equals 24. So we can't have a rule that works sometimes and not other times. So there's got to be some adjustment we need to make to our process so that it will work all the time. So think about that and be prepared for us to talk about that when we meet next.